Hello, everyone. My name is Joshua Gilliland, and I'm one of the founding attorneys of the Legal Geeks. With me this evening to discuss the Bad Batch episode Entombed is Thomas Harper. Tom, how you doing?
I'm doing wonderful. We got new Star Wars to talk, and I leave for Batuu in a few days. Not aboard the Halcyon, unfortunately, but a trip to Batuu is always something to be thankful for. So
Definitely. I was able to renew my magic key, so I look forward to being able to go to Disneyland, maybe during WonderCon or some of the other events coming up, because sometimes you just want to cheer up and ride Space Mountain.
exactly. Do you want to give a quick because it's the news can be released publicly? Do we want to give a sneak preview?
Yes, for you. So I can
True.
say I submitted panels for WonderCon, and we remain optimistic that they'll give us at least one. But you have news. Where are you
Yes.
going to be?
Well, as a steward of the Legal Geeks and the Red Cross, I will be joined by Gabby Martin. So many of you know, you've listened to Gabby, you've watched Gabby, you've read Gabby's stuff on the blog. She's a phenomenal attorney and a massive Star Wars fan, just an all-around tried and true legal geek. She's going to be joining me with a small team. We're actually going to go to PAX East for the first time up in Boston at the end of March. If you're not familiar with PAX, it's probably one of the biggest, if not the second biggest to E3 video gaming conventions. It's on the East Coast and up there in Boston. Should be a fun time, but we're going to do a panel about the law of war in video games. So everything from Skyrim to Jedi Fallen Order to all the other Star Wars video games that I will no doubt cram in there. We'll look at some non-war type games like Mario and try to extract some issues as we do. But it'll be fun. It'll be the first time that we've cracked into that convention, so it should be a good time.
That's outstanding. And if all goes well, we'll be at WonderCon the same weekend. So we'll have Legal Geeks
coast to coast.
Yes, fantastic. The simulcast can begin. So let's talk about Bad Batch. I, again, am grateful to live in a world where we have Star Wars on a weekly basis. This episode had call outs and homages to Indiana Jones, Kaiju and Daimajin. There is a lot of, you can tell that the fandoms were heavily in play in the writer's room this season of Bad Batch. And even some of the musical selection had different Raiders type feels to it. And it also has wonderful legal issues because we begin in a junkyard, which raises the issue of, can you just go into a junkyard and take stuff? And the answer is kinda. So it depends on the junkyard. So if it's a junkyard that sells stuff, no, it's like a pick and pull. You're going to go in and you pay money to either enter for a period or you pay per pound for what you get. Like, it's all kinds of weird requirements. And I know there are people who love pick and pulls to go find car parts for their classic Mustang to rebuild. And then there's the view that it's abandoned property. And if it's abandoned property, nobody owns it, and thus it's a free-for-all. So if you see junk, it could be yours. And that could then be your treasure, because that could be very much in the eye of the beholder. I do not recommend going to junkyards and just doing that for giggles. That could have all kinds of negative repercussions on what your spouse might think of you, friends and family. I worry about people who dumpster dive to think that they're going for treasure. But Tom, thoughts on this?
This is an interesting look at post Clone Wars, or the post Clone Wars galaxy, because they're not just salvaging from any old junkyard. This is war scrap. I mean, they are looking through at least that I saw in the background, like wreckage of one of the Republic gunships, the Lats, and that's a scene that's probably playing out across the galaxy. I mean, we sort of famously saw it at the center of Rey's character in The Force Awakens, but this is probably all over the place. And so it's, at some point it had been Republic and now Imperial military property, but it's been destroyed. And at least in this instance, I think there's a pretty clear-cut argument that this has been abandoned. You have other areas. I mentioned Jedi Fallen Order, so you have a ship breaking world on Braca, where you have this massive tear down operation where they're salvaging parts, and it's a business, kind of like Josh mentioned. But that's not the case here. It's just sort of, you might as well have tossed a bunch of Jawas in there and they'd be right at home. This is sort of a tried and true, rusted out heap from an old battle. So I think they're okay.
Agreed with that. It doesn't look like there's any breaking and entering. They're like just going through the junkyard. It's their thing.
They're breaking, but just in a different sense.
Yeah, it's like they're opening what's in this compartment, what's in this glove box. And again, somebody's life, somebody's treasure. And we don't touch on like how long has that compass been in there? How many, is this thing like 10,000 years old? And it's just been shuffled throughout the galaxy, and it ends up with someone who is inspired enough to go like, hey, this looks like a compass with a star chart. I mean, I did feel this episode was a little frantic or scattered, disjointed. I mean, there's a couple ways to look at it, but yeah. Now you did add to our outline the issue of booby traps to protect property. That might go more towards going to the planet, but did you want to address that now?
Oh, my commentary was once they get to the planet and they're looking for the heart of the mountain.
Gotcha. Well, let's go to the planet, and they're out treasure hunting. The planet looks abandoned, which gives similar analysis to Morag from Guardians of the Galaxy, that if everybody there is dead, no one cares about it anymore. It's an abandoned planet, and all the property on it is abandoned and forgotten, and nobody cares. I think salvaging it is legally acceptable because it's abandoned. It's been there for thousands upon thousands of years. How long have the Jedi been in existence? Even though they've just been wiped out, but like, what's the...
At that point, so Obi-Wan quotes 1,000 generations.
And if a generation's 20 years, so that's 20,000. So
yeah, so 19 and some change, I suppose.
Okay. So something older than, over 20,000 years old. So like it could be, I don't know, 500,000. Like this would be like coming upon cave drawings, except when you are expecting cave drawings, you find what's left of a primitive or an automobile from a very different era. That would be, whoa, that should not exist. So, but this planet's been leveled, nuked. It's like nothing's alive there anymore except for some foliage growing. Like it's not, there's nobody there to claim ownership. We go to the entrance and they shoot. Is it recklessness to go in? What do you think?
So it doesn't seem like they have much knowledge at all, other than that this location might contain a treasure of some sorts. Generally, and it doesn't seem like Fee has really any idea that this could be sort of a dangerous journey ahead, an idea of booby traps, or really anything about the civilization or people that were behind the treasure, the heart of the mountain, or what we ultimately find is this super weapon, Scaranal. None of it. So it's you're back to relying on maybe her sort of general experience or what a reasonable person might expect. And really at that point, you're dealing in the business of foreseeability of perils in entering a really old place. And I don't know that it would rise to the level of recklessness here. Certainly you've got Omega with you, and I think the calculus is different. You have the business of bringing a child along. I think your risk level goes up, and maybe you're flirting with that level. But recklessness, as far as a legal standard goes, is not a low one. And so I think you have some problems with foreseeability here.
One of the things that I jumped on from an environmental safety issue was the air quality. So they open the doorway, which is sealed. It's possibly been tens of thousands of years since anyone's gone in there. You don't know if the air is safe. There was no testing of the environment to go like, we could go in. So like with on board a big boat, and let's say opening up the forecastle to go in, or the forepeak to go in and do some work to whether it's clean out one of the bilge pumps, the rose box that could be in there for pumping out water if it gets in. So part of a boat that's generally not accessible, and it's sealed. And so when you open it up, you want to ventilate it and put like a air pump in there to pump out stale air, because you don't know if it's safe. And there are devices to measure air quality.
Mm-hmm.
Is this dangerous to someone? And it's like opening up, again, a tomb, and pick the culture with a tomb. I don't know if that's a good idea. I would want to test air quality before we go into the 40,000-year-old tomb to see what's inside. So I do think it's high risk behavior. Whether or not it's recklessness is, again, could be subject to debate. I do think it's negligent. It's like you did nothing to ensure the safety of anyone before walking in to a formally sealed chamber and not knowing the environmental quality of that compartment. So I think it's a bad thing.
Yeah,
but
you got to at least to bring D&D into this, you got to at least roll a history check or a check for traps, something like that. They did none of this.
No,
unacceptable.
No, and tech's good at scanning that sort of thing, and so they don't. Tech was analyzing races just last episode. There's like no scan.
He's
nothing.
tired. He's tired. He needs a break.
Just on a victory lap. He's just dialing in and fine, we'll do this for the kid. They go in and we start encountering booby traps.
Mm-hmm.
Talk to me about booby traps.
Well, the long and short of it, illegal. You can't set them up to protect your property. This is sort of the classic element of a treasure hunt story. I mean, Indiana Jones, the plot line of almost all the movies revolves or involves in at least some form or fashion booby traps set by some ancient being or culture to protect property. And it's no different here. They encounter a number of you start off with a puzzle in that room, but they end up with some pretty deadly traps there designed to protect the treasure, protect what ultimately is sort of, I guess, the command center, the item that can turn on this super weapon. The law sort of almost uniformly treats booby traps as if not outright illegal. There are certain states that outlaw booby traps. So on the books, they make them a criminal offense. Arkansas is one of those states where it's a lower class of felony to rig your property with a booby trap. But it goes to the notion that we've covered in podcasts before, this business of what level of force does the law find to be acceptable to use in certain situations. And when there's a big difference and a big gulf between using force or even deadly force to protect yourself, a human being, a life, and using force to protect stuff. And the law really looks unfavorably on the latter. There's not much justification, even in situations where your stuff's actively getting stolen and you have a really reasonable fear of future property loss or property damage. The law still doesn't really allow for booby traps. And we talked last week, one of my favorite cases from law school. I'm going to bring another of my favorite cases in law school, Catco versus Briney. This is a case probably studied still to this day by every law student in their first year torts class. But it's a case about booby traps. Like, how could you not like a case about that? But it's this man and woman, this is in the 70s. They own an old sort of abandoned farmhouse in Iowa. They place no trespassing signs outside. This house is all boarded up, but they experience frequent break-ins. So the husband, Mr. Briney, he rigs up a 20 gauge shotgun to fire whenever the door to a particular bedroom is open. Well, along comes Mr. Catco. He enters the house to steal some fruit jars, of all things. He opens the booby trap door and the shotgun fires on his legs. Put Catco in the hospital, and he ultimately wins a settlement that's equates to just shy of about 200 grand these days. And so the case was decided against the property owner in spite of Catco being there for all the wrong reasons. And the same is true here. That the motivation is different. I don't think this civilization that set up all these traps intended, or they feared so much that the property would be stolen. I think that these traps were set to keep people out so that this scaranal would never be awoken again, activated, if you will. But even that is not justification to do this sort of thing. And you see repeated cases in the real world again and again where the most sort of seemingly justified of individuals end up having their cases decided against them because you just can't set booby traps.
No. I mean, like a huge issue in law school and torts. California's jury instructions on defense of property state when conditions are present which, under the law, justify a person using force in defense of property, that person may use that degree and extent of force as would appear to a reasonable person placed in the same position and seeing and knowing what the resisting person then sees and knows to be reasonably necessary to prevent imminent injury threatened to the property. Any use of force beyond that limit is excessive and unjustified, and anyone using excessive force is legally responsible for the consequences thereof. And that's CalJig number 5.43. There's case law that's similar, that you don't get to put landmines out. Like you tiger traps, like, no, like this is a boulder falls out of the ceiling and could have crushed somebody. Not okay. Now it's an interesting question that who set all this up? Because did they turn off the war machine and then put all these booby traps in order to prevent people from getting inside? Interesting question. Everybody's dead, but it did remind me a little of a Force Unleashed with some of the puzzles you have to unlock in order to move up. I haven't played Fallen Order, so I don't know if there's anything similar in that, but it did feel familiar with what they had in this. Which then brings us to the question of super weapons. So there's, again, clearly folks love Japanese kaiju movies and Daimajin, which is like a big statue that comes to life that's 50 feet tall. And this looks like a mech. It's automated. It doesn't seem to be a droid. There's definitely some AI working in order to process what to shoot at. But it does have that feel like Mechagodzilla or Mechanicon. It turns on and just starts unleashing hell to vaporize everything around it, which again is a terror weapon. You know, it's 4 legs. It walks strangely since the front legs are much larger than the rear. I saw one article that highlighted this looks like an alien from Fallen Order. Did you get into that at all?
No, I didn't make that connection, but it does look. I assume the connection is to the Zepho, these beings that pre-Jedi Order beings that were Force users. So it could be that the episode didn't give any backstory on it, but that's a cool connection if it's actually what it is. Terrifying weapon though.
Yeah, it's meant to scare the bejesus out of people before vaporizing them. So and then leave nothing alive. Normally with a terror weapon, it's to instill terror, so the survivors express terror. This is scary and commits genocide. So that's just brutal. It will terrify the population before it eliminates them. But somebody had to turn it off. Unless it turned off on its own, but then who set the traps? So there's a but we don't need all these answers. But those are the things that I do wonder about. Okay, here we go.
Yeah, it immediately brought back memories of the Death Star and its most famous super laser that we see, but this is land-based, which is very different than something we've seen before. And it really charts a really terrific level of destruction as it unleashes its beam. And so it got me thinking, you know, could you have this as a legitimate weapon of war? I mean, the implication is that Scaranal was used and maybe be the reason why this planet there out in the Kaldar Trine area is like abandoned or dead at this point. It seems like a big battle was had to bury it in the mountain. But really the problem with a weapon like that, it's not patently illegal to have a highly destructive device like that. Even a super weapon or a super laser could be lawful in some circumstances, but it's really hard to employ a weapon like that and not commit a war crime, quite frankly, because it's an indiscriminate beam. It's not like, say, a laser blast that you can aim and discriminate in your target and control the proportionality of your damage. In other words, you know, what advantage are you gaining militarily versus the civilian collateral damage? There's no discrimination there with a weapon like that. It destroys whatever you point it at. And the weapon itself is automated and it just seems in destructo mode. It doesn't seem to be applying any real thought to what it's targeting. And so that's an entirely different layer of problems. If the weapon just both its weaponry and the vehicle itself that mounts it can't discriminate or won't, that's just sort of patently illegal. And that's to say nothing of the scale of destruction. And, you know, how can you deploy that in a way that doesn't just cause unacceptable collateral damage?
It's designed to kill everyone. So
exactly.
Unless you're at total war, where the civilian population is now fair game, it's a walking war crime. So, because you're going to deploy it to raise the planet. It's going to take decades for it to walk around and kill everything. That's its intent. It's tough to make that legal.
Yeah. Well, and Mel, the poor droid here pays the ultimate price and gets evaporated, although Fee says she can rebuild her. We'll see.
Yeah, it's the backup won't have the trauma of getting vaporized, so
Yeah, right.
good. It won't remember the terror, but it does raise interesting questions about letting Omega be near Fee, because Hunter's doing the good dad thing of not just shutting down the opportunity. They all say, fine, we're family road trip, get in the station wagon, we're going to go exploring for treasure. Not many dads are on board with that plan. It's like, let's go to Arizona to find the lost Dutchman mine. Like, few dads would go, game on. I don't lost track of all the people who died doing this, but it will be different for us. And they go for it. But you see Fee's style, Omega being enamored with it, and that's dangerous. But he doesn't say no, which would cause the preteen child to naturally want to hang out with Fee more. So this way, it's at least they can see the error of the ways. But I don't think Omega's discouraged by the fact that they all nearly died.
No.
5 or 6 times in like 30 minutes. So, and Hunter's big on that. It's like, we nearly died 3 times today, and that's in the middle of the episode. So like the risk factor is not over yet.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think Fee's a bad influence. I would not want the kid around the highly destructive personality that could get people killed.
Don't let Wanda Sykes let her hear that.
It's what if it been Omega outside fleeing for her life? There's no backup of her. So
This is true.
It's just convenient the droid got fried or vaporized.
It's always got to be the droid.
Yeah, I don't remember what podcast highlighted the Bad Batch's body count of droids, but apparently it's high. I mean, Mando season 1 was high for Astromechs. I think it was 4, maybe 5.
Right.
So but they seem to be going through a couple of episodes. So yes. That said, tons of fun. I'm grateful that we have this every week. Any other issues that you noticed in this one?
No, I'm looking forward to hopefully getting back to some of the core story. I think we've had a couple sort of reset episodes, and I'd like to see the series dig back in, if not to Crosshair's story with I want to see the clone or the cloning storyline picked back up from last season, but we'll see. It was a fun episode.
It was. Now, here's something I've wondered a lot about with Echo. And we know they don't embrace this technology because we've seen stories that cover another, 40 years worth of in the timeline. Somebody loses a limb, they get a robot hand, bionic. They don't try cloning a new hand and giving that person a new organic hand. Because when I look at what's left of Echo, why didn't those on Camino just clone the rest of him to give him a new donor body for the lower half that he lost? Which then would open the issue for, you lose a hand to a lightsaber, you can get a new hand. But they don't go that way. They don't go that way. But that's something I've been thinking about with, if you got good cloning tech, you could give somebody a new hand.
Yeah.
Or in this case,
He likes his
body.
He likes his scomplink. That's all.
There's very little left of him. So, and you see him eating, it's like, I don't think you have any plumbing left. Like, how's this all work? So anyway, those are just medical questions that I wonder about.
Yeah.
Well, with that, thank you everyone for tuning in. We'll be back for more. And come February, we'll be Bad Batch, probably Picard, And then hit March, we'll get Mando. So there's going to be lots of things to talk about in the near future. So wherever you listen, please leave a review. We do have a Patreon. And everyone, stay safe, stay healthy, and stay geeky.